if you don't mind. So I'm joined here in the dungeon, as it's now known, on Dame Street by Paddy Breathnach. Paddy, you sat on the board at Film Base at one time.
Yeah, I was on the board, and I can't remember exactly, but it would have been the early 90s or early to mid 90s. I think I'm trying to remember who else was on the board. I know Ed Guiney was on. Hugh Linehan might have been on the board. He was the editor of Film Ireland, and so I think he was on the board at the time as well. Mm-hmm. Jeanette was running Film Base at the time, and who else was there? I'll have to remember. Sorry if I'm forgetting.
That's
anybody.
all right. So this is a little bit, tiny bit like coming home for you. This building, this little hideaway.
There was this sort of little block. In a way, was very kind of important because we had our offices in Treasure Films in Shamrock Chambers, and that's also where Element, or Temple as it was called then, had their offices, and then Newgrange, Leslie McKim had her offices there too. It wasn't Newgrange at that stage, but so there was a kind of real hub of sort of, I suppose, young or embryonic companies at that stage who were there. So there was a bit of an energy about the place, and then obviously it's Film Base itself, and that had something going on. Yeah. And there was that time when, you know, the film board had just been re-established, and there was a kind of, there had been an energy anyway, but then it was sort of, I suppose, a broader sense of stuff beginning to happen in the economy and in the country, and a sort of enthusiasm and a hunger for things was very prevalent at that moment.
Yeah. So, you've been around a long time, but we are here today to talk, of course, about Viva, a beautiful and rich film. So congratulations for the 6 millionth time, I'm sure. Are you sick of talking about Viva at this stage? It's gotten so much coverage in the last year.
No, I mean, it's a film that I'm very happy always to show and present. It was like a wonderful experience making it, and it's been a really nice experience showing it. I mean, you always, when you talk about something, there's always a sort of creep, a little bit of, you wondered incrementally, does your story change, or do you develop or embellish your story as you go on? Because, what your intentions are before you start meet the reality of when you're making it, and then the reality of how it's perceived affects your memory of what was there at the start. There's a whole range, or there's a journey in itself about talking about the film and where it came from and where you are now with it, So there's an aspect of it that I think there's a touch as you go on with it. You become, I don't know if self-conscious is the right word, but you maybe in some ways you're reflective of it. Like you start asking yourself, was I really thinking that at the beginning, or when did that idea come in? And you begin to sort of re-parse out your story in relation to it.
Well, I wanted to ask you firstly anyway about the music.
Yeah. Because
that forms such a huge part of the film, in the way that his mother's records are, it's a process of healing between him and his father, and the songs that he sings, the songs that they all sing. After your initial experience in Havana at a backyard drag club, were those selections yours? Was that something you wanted to impart, or was that your composer Stephen Rennick's?
No, the songs would have been, let's say, I mean, there was a number of songs and performers that I would have noted through the research and everything, that I was building up a little library, let's say, of stuff. And then in the script process as well, Mark would have brought in some singers that were slightly different from the ones that I had brought to it. And then you sort of try and shape what songs you want to use in the film, and then it meets another reality, which is, can you afford those songs? Can you buy them? Are they available? Even sometimes if you can buy them and buy the rights to use them in your film, will the person who who's selling them let you use them, even if you can afford it. So, for example, there was a couple of songs I wanted to use, and the right holders had agreed a deal, but then when they heard the context in which they were being used, they withdrew their permission.
Wow, really? Yeah.
Whether that was, there was a sort of sense it could have been a homophobic thing, or it could have been that they thought because we were going to put it in the context of a drag club that we were going to make fun of the songs in some way or belittle the songs, which was obviously not the reverse.
But they're kicking themselves now.
Yeah. So it's hard to know. But what I'm saying is the journey of actually whittling down in a practical sense, trying to get enough songs that you can use that have the spirit of what you want, and at the same time can work within the context of a low budget film. So there was a huge journey on that. But I think the essence of what we wanted was always preserved within that. And sometimes those sort of limitations actually create opportunities, where you get a song that you hadn't considered, and actually it turns out to be the best song you could have had for the moment.
Yeah. So you had worked with Stephen Rennicks before, and producers Rebecca O'Flanagan and Robert Walpole. Do you feel like that kind of continued collaboration contributed to the success of the film, knowing the way each other worked? And
yeah, I think shorthand, when you have an ability to cut to the chase with people, and them with you, in terms of, or just knowing what people's priorities are and where they stand with something, and that you can communicate that quickly and have a kind of joint force that's established on very good foundations, I think always works,
Yeah.
I mean, I know working with a composer, with Stephen, it's sort of a very peculiar language in a way. I don't have any technical musical language, and you have to find ways and maybe invent language and words sometimes of what you mean, how a sort of emotion or a tone that you feel is in or absent in a piece of music, and you've got to be able to communicate that to somebody who's obviously has a very sophisticated language. And I had worked with Stephen before, and so that type of experience with somebody lets you get to the point much more quickly. Yeah, so it's very valuable, and it's also part of the journey of you begin to say, well, you're living your life by making films, so you want to make films with people who you enjoy the journey with. If you're in a new situation, I mean, it can bring great challenges and excitement and freshness, and you have to replenish how you do things, I suppose, so that you get those challenges. But at the same time, there's just such, it's important to enjoy the process, and working with people helps to do that. Yeah,
and just talking about communications there on a more practical level, were there, in terms of communicating with the cast, how was your Spanish? Were the limitations there?
Yeah, my Spanish would have been sort of fairly, let's say, I wasn't very particularly fluent in Spanish. I had a basis and a grounding, and I kind of knew the world of the film in Spanish, let's say. But I think I learned in that process that, a lot of your judgments and a lot of your sort of how you assess a performance is quite instinctive and intuitive. A lot of what they're doing, you sort of know immediately, the tone of it, let's say, and all those things. If you're working with good actors, or non-actors, it makes life easy, in the sense that good actors are intuitive animals, so they can respond to you and they understand what you're getting at, even if it's in broken Spanish or whatever. They know what you're trying to point to. If you're working with non-actors, you're trying to capture something in them, so actually you don't want to direct them that much in a funny kind of way. You need to be very careful. It's almost saying less is more in that instance. If you're working with mediocre actors, that's where it's difficult, because you need much more language and facility with language to be able to, let's say, deconstruct and reconstruct a performance that a mediocre actor is giving.
Yeah.
So I was worried going into it, but as it transpired, it wasn't something that was hugely difficult, you know.
Yeah, there are many ways to communicate, as you said.
There are many ways to communicate, and I think in something like that where you're working with somebody who's very bright and intelligent, and you're talking about something that both of you have shared. I mean, I obviously knew the script in English, but I also knew it very well in Spanish because I'd been involved in the translation process. So that, which means in some ways that you ingest the script in a particular kind of way, down in much greater detail maybe than if you were just working off it in English, because you have to make sure that full stop or that comma there represents something. It means something in the script. So when it's not there in Spanish, has it been translated properly or whatever? You know, you have to interrogate that process. So in a funny way, my knowledge of the script was fairly in depth, and I mean in a language sense in Spanish. And then you've got actors who understand the script and what it represents in great detail. So the space between you is already kind of well defined. So then it's just, you know, communicating kind of intensity, I suppose, and conviction, and other qualities are more important than maybe even the literal things you're trying to say. You know, it's not the literal translation, because when I had interpreters, and you can use them, but often when you use an interpreter, it misses what the most important thing is, and that's, I suppose, a sense of conviction.
Right, yeah. As I said, you've been making films for a long time now, and a lot of people will be of the opinion that this is your finest work. Is that the way you feel about it?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, when the film started being talked about or whatever, it was, you know, kind of a lot of the reviews were sort of saying it was a surprising departure in some way for me. I'm not quoting anything particular, but in many ways for me it was like a return to the early films I made, Ailsa and I Went Down, and rather than being a departure, for me it was like reconnecting with where I had been a little bit, you know. I think probably in, you know, obviously as you move on, you kind of, you know, you learn and you develop and you become more skillful and more, you know, adept at doing things. And sometimes with that process, sometimes you kind of lose something as well, you know. You can lose a sort of excitement maybe or something like that in your filmmaking. And I think with this, because it was the nature of the project in Cuba, that brought a kind of rejuvenated a certain excitement or a freshness. It was like making your first film in some ways. But then the experience let me, I think, it's bring a certain kind of lightness to, or touch or whatever, to the film that I think, you know, whether it's the best film you make, I don't know, but maybe it's most accomplished in some ways, you know.
And the last couple of years have been significant for Irish film, and with the Viva being selected for Best Foreign Film for the Oscars, what did it feel like to be part of such a historic moment for Irish film and part of that band of films and filmmakers?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting for me at the time. I mean, we sort of fell that bit short because, you know, we were on the short list for it, but we didn't get the actual nomination. And we heard later on that we were very close to getting the nomination, like very, very close. And it would have been, I mean, one of the things that was in the back of my mind was because, particularly with, say, Lenny and Ed, who they made their first short film around the same time as I made mine, and Rob Walpole produced mine as well. And we both screened for the first time at the Cork Film Festival in 1991. So the idea that, you know, 25 years, is it 25 years later? 25 years later, we might have been in the same, another room at the same time, celebrating our achievements would have been very exciting. And it was, you know, that was actually one of the disappointments that we weren't there in that sense, that it would have been a real sense of how that, you know, real overt, I suppose, sense of how the industry has moved on and developed in some ways. So So I did very definitely felt a part of that. And you can see what's interesting about it is, go back 5 or 6 years longer, there was a sense every couple of years you'd have a great white hope. Somebody would make a film and everyone say, oh, this is a great new thing, and I had a moment of that, and then Lenny had his moments of that, and then other people, had their moments. Mm-hmm. And now what happens is that in 1 year or in a 2 year phase, you've got 4, 5, 6, 7 moments like that clustered or happening around the same time. And that's such a much more healthy situation because it's just, the idea that a film industry that's motoring along with one talent or something like that is, it's just not tenable, So it's great to feel that you're part of that maturing process.
Right.
And maybe the filling in of the space since the, Jim and Neil's generation or whatever, since they made those great strides, that it's sort of become a bit more constant now.
Yeah. So the film comes out tomorrow on DVD.
Yeah.
And you can get a copy in Tower Records, Golden Disc and the Eye of Vice shop. And it's on VOD from iTunes, Virgin Media and Volta. The idea of DVDs is kind of ebbed and flowed in the last couple of years. This idea of it being obsolete, maybe like a photograph or a book. But there's something special about being able to hold it in your hand and to have a copy of something, especially as maybe a collector's item or...
Yeah, I think so. To have something, to be able to go, like I know, my collection of DVDs, to be able to sort of say to somebody, oh, you should watch that film and hand it to them immediately, or to, so if you teach a class or something like that, that you can show it very quickly. I don't know if that's against the law or not, but but that you having something tangible that you can see and flick along a shelf or something is great. But obviously we're moving, that world is moving on. Mm-hmm. So whether those things become collector's items in a few years' time, and or whether like with record players that they come back in, whether we'll do that with DVD players, I don't know.
So probably. Keep the wrappers on, basically. Yeah. Is there anything in the pipeline for you, Paddy? Are you looking to strike while the iron is hot? Are you taking a break?
No, I don't want to take a break for sure. I mean, anything I'm working on at the moment, it's probably this time next year before any of it comes to pass. But I'm working with Mark O'Halloran, on 2 projects. And they're both very exciting, kind of both into it. So, and the kind of push on from Viva in a certain way. I suppose they're not very much character driven with a sort of humanity about them, Mm-hmm. So I'm excited about them, and hopefully they'll happen. But until they happen, you don't know,
Yeah, you've a little girl to keep you busy, anyways. She features in the film, I believe.
Yeah, Josie. She's a little baby in the end at the credits. So she was herself. My wife came over while we were filming, and she became like almost a bit of a mascot on the crew because they'd come for lunch every day. Okay. And she'd be handed around from various crew members and actors. And for her, it was just Cuba's so full of life. It's a place that you just feel the life is bouncing off of the walls, Mm-hmm. And I think she kind of sensed that, even though she was only 8 months at the time. I think she sensed it and kind of rose to the challenge, saw it was an adventure and rose to that adventure. And you could really see her enjoying it and just feeling this excitement about the place. Mm-hmm. So we put her in the film. So it's preserved there. So she's part of Cuban film history as well.
She's well established then. Yeah. Paddy Breathnach, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Grace.
Okay.
Take care.